Welcome to another episode of The Ronnie Phillip Show. I'm your host, Ronnie Phillip, with Kingly Acquisitions, where we focus on acquiring value-add apartment buildings. If you're watching this video, make sure you give us a thumbs up, give us some hearts, leave us some questions and comments, so that way we know who's watching. Today, I have the honor of introducing today's guest on the show. Rick Sapio is the co-founder of Business Finishing School and also the CEO of Mutual Capital Alliance, and he's happened to invest in over 100 companies. Welcome to the show, Rick.
Thank you, Ronnie. Glad to be here.
So, Rick, give us an introduction and how he got started in business.
Yep. As I told you when I was preparing, I wanted to flip the script on you so I can hear from your words and your audience can hear. Why do you do this show? And what do you want to leave your guests with after they listen to this interview?
So the purpose of my show, actually, this will be the first time I ever tell it on camera. The Ronnie Phillip Show was something that rooted out of my struggle with anxiety and depression. And listening to great content like Grant Cardone, Ed Milet, all these different things is what helped me get out of depression. So what the Ronnie Phillip Show started was out of a pit, and I wanted to help others who are in the same pit get out. So that's why I decided to go out and interview very successful people, because I feel like there's always hope whenever you see people living fulfilled and successful lives. So that's the real reason I started the Ronnie Phillip Show.
Awesome. So what do you want them to get out of this specific interview?
So I know this interview is going to be much different than any other interview. So if you're watching this, make sure you stay tuned to this entire show. So it's going to be completely different. And what I want y'all to get out of it is simplicity and how to run a business in a unique way. And we're going to talk more about business finishing school towards the end. So make sure I'll stay tuned.
Cool. Well, I told you before the show that what I like to talk about are things that no one else talks about because it's countercultural. And I think we're getting swarmed with all kinds of messages that are very similar in nature. Like you can have it all and do the least, produce the most. And it's all about money and cars and houses and all that stuff. And for me, life isn't about that at all. In fact, it's about the opposite of that. How you can have a long-term marriage, how you can have a great business, how you can have the things that align with your purpose and your values in your life without compromise. And where I wanted to start on that is this. I know I'm taking you off your game because you have your list of questions, and we'll get to those. But this notion of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I actually wrote a blog about this that has yet to be published because I'm going to get so much backlash. But I think the pursuit of happiness has destroyed more companies, more relationships, more marriages, and a lot of people's self-esteem and value because it's all about here and now. And let me give an example of what I mean by that. I had an employee that I had to let go after a year because whenever he had objectives that he needed to fulfill on, I would meet with him the next day or the next week, and I go, Bob, what's going on with your objectives? And he would say, well, they just don't make me happy. I'm really not that committed to those right now. I'm like, well, it's a quarterly objective, which means you have to focus on it for 90 days. And I said, let me ask you a question. Did your parents tell you do what makes you happy? And his face lit up. He goes, yes. My mom used to say that to me every single day, do what makes you happy. And I said, I want to call your mom. And I called her up and I said, you've destroyed your son. She goes, what do you mean? That's so silly. That's ridiculous. And this kid went from job to job to job, was depressed all the time because he never learned fulfillment. Fulfillment's the opposite of happiness. Happiness is, I do what makes me happy today, which means if I'm married to my wife and I meet another girl, she might make me happy for the moment. Hey, I'll just do that. Or if I don't have a lot of money in the bank, but a Corvette that I like is something that appeals to me, let me just go buy that because that's going to make me happy. Fulfillment comes after a long-term grind. If I want to lose 100 pounds and I take a year of getting up at 5 a.m., working out for 2 hours, eating right, and really busting my ass more than I've ever done in my life. I'm not happy while I'm doing that. In fact, I'm hating it most of the time. But after a year, when I lose that 100 pounds, I'm fulfilled. And another example of that is last weekend I was with my mentor. He's about to turn 90, and his name is Reinhold. He's actually from Germany, but I was at his house in Florida with my family, and him and his wife have been married for 67 years. He met his wife originally when he was 17 or 18, and she was 15. And they are lovebirds. She's 85-ish, he's 89-ish, and they're unbelievably happy. And I said, what was it like being married for 67 years? And he said, most of the time, it was hell. But we are unbelievably fulfilled now. And we've got 16 grandkids, and life couldn't be better. So I believe a counterculture message that no one is talking about is fulfillment. Happiness is absolutely ridiculous. It leads people to depression, medication, short-term fixes, walking away from commitments like jobs, like marriages. And it's hard enough to be married. I've got 4 young kids. I've been married to my wife, my only wife, for a long time. But the reality is we don't always have easy days with 4 young kids, but we're completely fulfilled and we're completely committed. And I, in fact, think commitment comes from having a long-term vision. If a couple says, let's write down what life's going to be like in 50 years, and they come up with a paragraph, and they say 50 years from now, we're going to have 7 grandkids, 2 great grandkids, we're going to have a house in Colorado in the mountains, we're going to enjoy tea every morning. That image gets imprinted, and that image allows us to not pursue happiness, but pursue instead long-term fulfillment. So I wanted to start my message off that way, because I think we're getting messages in society that are so opposite of what I just said. And that's why what I'm saying is countercultural. But the fact of the matter is it shouldn't be countercultural. It should be what everybody's pursuing, fulfillment after grit.
That makes sense. So let's talk about your childhood, and I know research a lot about that. I wanted to see, because this fulfillment thing, I believe it comes from childhood, and let's dive into it.
Yeah. So when I talk to my childhood with my siblings, they say it was horrible. You had the worst upbringing because of what you endured and everything else. And I look back at my childhood as a gift given to me by my parents, by my neighborhood, by God, ultimately, if you think about it. Like, the most successful people that you ever interview are people that endured, right? But what are we looking for in society? We're looking for the opposite of that, which is quick fixes, which blows my mind. So I'll try to be brief, but when I was born, I was the 7th of 10 kids that my mother had. And when I was 11 days old, my brother, who had been sick throughout the whole pregnancy that my mother had with me, he died when I was 11 days old. So for those listening that know a 4-year-old, what that would be like for a mother to lose a 4-year-old. And my mother, when she lost my brother Frankie, who was her 4th child, I was 7th, it destroyed her, and she never recovered, ever. And I often say that I never had a sane conversation with my mother in my life. Her entire existence was how can she get Frankie back? And she took a lot of that out on me because I was an ADT kid, ADD, had really bad allergies, always sick. I was a sick kid a lot, and not to mention OCD and other things that I had. But I drove my mother nuts, and she would say things to me like, why did God take Frankie and not you? And so I had this unbelievable need to prove myself. And then when I was 11, my dad came home, and he announced to the whole family that he just found out he had cancer. And on the first doctor visit, he had stage 4 cancer. They gave him 6 weeks to live. So my dad ended up living for 2.5 more years. But during that time, he's like, look, your mother's not going to support you. We don't have any money. So I've got to teach you how to be self-sufficient. And he did the best job he could. But the reality was, you want to learn self-sufficiency, Ronnie? have no parents when you're 13, because that's when my dad died. And I'm living outside New York City with really no relatives, no money of any kind, no adults to look to. And so that's when I started seeking out mentors. And I know one of your questions is, do you think a college degree is important? And I would say only if it's something that's very specific to a STEM or medical type career, like a technology degree of some kind, because I'm an entrepreneur. I've always been an entrepreneur. But I had a mentor who said, I know you're an entrepreneur. I was 13. But if you get an engineering degree, it'll teach you how to think. And so that's the only degree that I could have gotten. He says, if you get an engineering degree, you could become a doctor, a lawyer, a business person. You can work on Wall Street, which was right across the river from where I lived. And so that engineering degree was brutally hard for me. I went to public schools, and I get to college. I started in 1982. And I'm in school with these people from other countries who were way ahead of me in every subject. And as you know, in engineering, you got to take chemistry and math and physics and technical writing and all these subjects I had no knowledge of. So my point is that engineering degree, which I did pursue and I did get, was worth it for me. But I have 4 children, and I'm debating, is college worth it?
Yeah.
Is a liberal arts degree worth it? I don't see how it could be. What are you learning that you can apply to building a business? And I think at the end of the day, we should be raising kids that are entrepreneurs, that can create businesses, that can create jobs, that can find career paths that align with their value in the world. Because at the end of the day, my belief is all of us are entrepreneurs. If you go back before the Industrial Revolution, we were all farmers. We were all making things that we were selling. The human condition is entrepreneurship. But the Industrial Revolution created this imaginary, nonsensical world of you got to have a boss, and you got to get a paycheck. And all that does is disempower people, in my opinion. So long answer, short question.
Yeah. So talk about like what advice you would give to millennials right now, because I feel like a lot of us in our age group are really lost. There's a lot of my friends going to college, and I see them unfulfilled. They're going to nursing school, pharmacy school, becoming a doctor. And I was pursuing pharmacy school, and I worked in a major pharmacy, and I realized this is limiting my potential. And I made the tough decision to drop out of college when I was 21. So what advice would you have for kids who are uncertain and want to find that fulfillment?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't like to give advice. I find that people, if they ask you for advice, that's one thing. So I don't think anybody here has asked me. So I'll just give a perspective, and if you like it, take it. I believe, I've interviewed a lot of people, as you know, 40 billionaires, and what I've learned from all of them is they're really not that busy and never were that busy. I never met Jeff Bezos from Amazon, but one of the things that I've learned about him, and a good friend of mine is close to him, the guy stops for 10 days once a quarter and reads books. He just reads. He doesn't like react to Facebook posts or, have social media or all that stuff. He just reads. And what I've learned is that very successful people are incredibly thoughtful about where their time goes. How are they spending every minute? So that's conscious decision-making about time. What I've learned with young people is they're unconscious about where their time goes. They're not thoughtful about it. They wake up in the morning and they're reacting to nonsense. Facebook, news, Instagram, email messages of all kinds. But yet the most successful people are creating and generating. They're not reacting. So put it in this perspective. If in life you can only be doing one of two things. You're either generating, which is creating. You're generating new businesses. You're generating books, plays. You're doing what you're doing right now, which is generating a conversation that's going to be posted out there. Or you're consuming. You're consuming content. You're consuming Twitter feeds. You're consuming news. You're consuming Netflix, binge watching Netflix or all that. You cannot be doing both in life. And what I have found is lately, the last 10 years or so, we've shifted from a society based on generating to a society based on consuming. And if I could get a young person to flip from consuming to generating, everything changes because they become empowered. They look for things that are aligned with their purpose. They become very conscious about where their time is going. And if you think about it, I'll just give you one analogy so you can really hammer this home. And this is really the basis for why I created Business Finishing School, which is to transform people's lives from consumers to generators, is the average person can't focus on more than 5 priorities in their life, period. And if you ask the average person, if you really boiled your life down to 5 priorities, what would they be? And people will give you, outside of their religious beliefs, they'll say, well, the most important thing is my career. Okay, great. That's one of the 5. The second thing is my relationship, my key relationship, my wife or my husband or whatever. The third thing is my health and fitness. The fourth thing is my hobby. And the fifth thing is learning and growth, as an example. So those are 5. Yet if you followed them around with a video camera, most of the time they're not doing any of those 5. Yet the most successful people in the world only do those 5. And if you followed them around with a video camera, that's all they're doing. So again, the person that's successful is moved from being a consumer to a generator, and they're generating their 5 priorities and they're doing their 5 priorities. People who are consumers, they have their 5 priorities too, but they're doing everything but. So what they're doing is they're just reacting and reacting and reacting. And their life is one big reaction to nonsensical things that don't give them fulfillment, and they're not a commitment. So, and that's how I see it.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense because I feel like there's so many distractions these days. Even like what I observed about you is you have a flip phone.
Mm-hmm.
So I want everyone to see that you carry around a 10-year-old flip phone, and that's just like that's amazing to see that you can operate over so many businesses just with that. So I think one thing I learned from you, Rick, is simplicity.
Well, it's not just with this. I mean, I have a computer. I find
Yeah.
I'm way more effective on a desktop computer punching through email as opposed to slogging through on a small device. It doesn't make sense. Even a laptop. I think I brought it with. Did I bring my laptop? Can you get it? It's out there. Is that going to make too much noise getting out? I think it's okay. But the fact of the matter is, I look for things that make life more efficient because at the end of the day, I want to focus as much time on my priorities. And these devices, even the smartphones, they're not intended for efficiency. They're really intended. It was funny. I went to the AT&T store because I travel sometimes and I can't get Uber. So I had to get a device to get Uber on.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, what are these devices for? And the guy at the AT&T store said, these devices are mainly for entertainment. They're not really meant to be used for communication, which I found really strange. Now, I don't know if it was true, but the reality is they're not meant for business efficiency. So I've got my setup with my desktop, set up in a way that I could actually do business on it. So for me, there's a clear distinction between when I'm working, which is typically in my office, and when I'm not in my office and I'm not working, like, for example, when I'm with my family. So I'm not against technology. I use technology. I'm just against technology on my person. I don't want my kids walking around with computers all over them. It doesn't make any sense to me. I think that keeps us away from our purpose. And yet, there's a famous story. You can Google it if you want. Not now. It says Steve Jobs was a low-tech parent. It was a New York Times interview. Steve Jobs was a low-tech parent. And the journalist went to his house because he had 3 young kids, and he wanted to find out how many devices did Steve Jobs have. And it was after the iPad came out, several years after the iPhone came out, and of course the Mac was out. And the journalist was shocked to find out that Steve Jobs himself did not have technology in his house. And he even said, it's really not meant for my kids. Isn't that weird?
That is weird.
But
I didn't even know that.
Look up the article.
So let's talk about um, you starting your business, and what were your challenges in starting a mutual capital alliance?
Well, first of all, after I got my engineering degree, it was 1987. I really didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I felt empowered because of the degree, which was, again, going back to the original part of the interview, it was really difficult to get from me. And I felt really fulfilled. I felt empowered. But even though I was empowered, it sounds like there's a truck outside backing up. Even though I was empowered, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. But as fate would have it, a friend of mine directed me to a job which was a investment banking job buying distressed public companies. So I was on a team of 5 people, and I got fully immersed in business. We were looking at companies that were filing for bankruptcy. We were getting on creditor committees. We were buying these companies at a reduced price. We were turning them around. And it was an unbelievable 6 years of my life. And I got very empowered by that. And what we would do is we would try to buy the companies by convincing wealthy people that we cold called to put up the money, basically. And so I had the opportunity to meet a lot of people, to do a lot of interesting deals. A lot of those people ultimately became famous people that I don't want to name drop, but I got to associate with people because of this cool job. But that all came from pursuing this engineering degree. I got a degree at Rutgers University. At the time, it was a high-ranking engineering program. I don't know how it is now. I don't follow it. I apologize to you Rutgers grads. But when I was 29, I needed the freedom of being my own boss. And I think a lot of people don't get their priorities in order when it comes to starting a business. I never did it for the money. I did it because I wanted to be free of the constraints of working for a big company. And so that was the original reason why I wanted to start Mutual Capital Alliance. I also wanted the freedom to pursue a lot of different deals. So here I am, I'm 28. I want to start my own business. And I thought consciously, what do I really want? Freedom. I want to be able to pursue a lot of opportunities. I want to continue in making investments. And so we created Mutual Capital Alliance as a holding company. The other thing was I didn't worry about what would have happened if I didn't do it. So the truth was, when I left in 1994, our 25th anniversary is actually in 4 months.
Wow.
And so we started the company when you were born.
Yeah.
It was a really bad time for me to start the business because my career was taking off. I was doing very well. I just got promoted to partner. And my partners were like, why would you start a business now? You're going to make millions of dollars here. And I thought, I'm not doing it for the money. So they would always ride me and tease me and make fun of me over the next 5 years because there was no question about it. I started my business at the absolutely positively the wrong time, because from 94 to 99, everything that we had been working on in the other firm went up tremendously in value. And I had this startup that didn't have a lot of assets at the time. So I walked away from millions of dollars, but I didn't regret it because I was doing something aligned with my purpose and aligned with my values. And I think that's the missing ingredient for a lot of people, especially young people. If you don't know what your values are because you didn't take the time to think about it, and you don't know what your purpose is because you didn't take the time to think about it and write it down, then how do you know if your life is a series of distractions or real opportunities? You don't know. So you've got to do the work to find out who you are. And only then can you look for aligned opportunities. But for me, I jumped off a cliff right into something that fully aligned. But I will tell you, the first 5 years were brutally hard. We didn't make any money. I went in debt. I couldn't, because I didn't have experience, I couldn't find good employees to work with me. It was rough.
So talking about what was all these different struggles, right? What was the turning point in your career, and where did you find your stride?
So I think the turning point in my life is probably the first thing. But for me, the turning point was when my dad died, and I realized I didn't have anything to fall back on.
Yeah.
Like I had to find those relationships on my own. No one's what's that quote when they say they're a self-made person? I don't think that's true. Self-made people, however, look for the right people to partner with and to align with and to get mentored by. And then that group all works together for that one person's success. So the turning point for me in my life was my dad dying, because it made me stronger. I could have gone one way or the other. And the way I went was, look, I've got nobody to fall back on. I literally have nobody. That's why I'm against inheritances, because if my dad died and left me an inheritance, I'd be a different person. Mm-hmm. But anyway, after starting the business, the turning point for me, I would say, was figuring out what the purpose of the business is. And that happened about 15 years ago. We never really had a crystal clear purpose of the business. I had a purpose of myself, but not of the business. And actually, it's embedded in Business Finishing School. This is the Business Finishing School logo, but we do a twice-a-year business growth summit. So I want to be clear that you're aware there's two different things. There's Business Finishing School that puts on the summit. And what we realize as a business is what our purpose is to inspire entrepreneurship through proven systems for business growth. Meaning, as a business, whether we're investing in a company or we're teaching somebody, what we've learned is it's about equipping people so they don't have to go through all the mistakes that I've been through and my dad went through and you've been through. The reality is people generally don't make the same mistake twice. They make it 15 or 20 times.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
That just boggles my mind. If there's a proven system that you can incorporate that lessens the probability that you're going to make mistakes, why wouldn't you use it? So Mutual Capital Alliance is all about investing in businesses and teaching businesses tools and techniques to radically improve the odds of success.
And what would be your core values?
So the three, I think I may have mentioned them through the course of conversation, maybe not, but the first value by far, and I call these operating values because values need to be operationalized, otherwise they don't mean anything. So our number one value is simplicity. And as evidenced by my technology, you tease me about it, and my car, when you operationalize simplicity, it goes into every decision that you make as a business. So most businesses don't think about simplicity. They just execute. But the most successful businesses in the world are very simple. They know why they exist. They make decisions that are going to increase the probability that they hit their objectives. So number one operating value is simplicity. Number two is probability, which I just mentioned. And probability is about only making decisions that increase the probability that you're going to hit your objective. So what I find interesting about businesses is if I ask them, where do you want to be in 10 years? And they say, we want to be here. We want to have 12 locations and 20 million in revenue and this many employees. I'll then say, well, why are you doing this over here? Because this would lower the probability of you hitting your objective. And the more close to home message for me, or another way to look at this as an analogy is, you're a young man, and I'm thinking about my 4 children who are younger than you. They're 4, 6, 8, and 10. And I'm saying, if my objective is to raise a 24-year-old that is independent, entrepreneurial, self-sufficient, God-fearing, and committed to, a monogamous relationship, if I wanted those 5 things for my kids, which I do, what am I doing now to increase the probability that that's going to happen? And when I talk to parents about that, they go, it's like a smack in the face. Holy cow, all the things I'm doing, travel sports where they make the child the star, or revolving everything around the child so that they're not humble, or not teaching them how to work because, well, I worked hard. I don't want my child to work hard. We're doing things that are the opposite of increasing the probability that they're successful at 24. And so probability is the second word. And I would ask the audience, how are you operationalizing in your business simplicity and probability? And the last one is leverage. So these are 3 most important operating values. Leverage is gathering your resources, all your resources you have. You have mailing lists, you have employees, you have ex-employees, you have investments, you have dollars in the bank, you have relationships, you have client lists of all kinds, you have products, you have knowledge, you have content. And how do I leverage that using rhythmic, habitual activities? And you'd be surprised at how much leverage you can build through relationships, through technology, through rhythms. And the example I'd love to use is if one of my personal objectives was to improve my marriage, a way to operationalize that using simplicity, probability, and leverage is, and we do it, is, honey, I'd like to go out to date night with you every Monday night. She goes, okay. How long you want to do that? I said, forever. So since the day I met my wife, we do a date night every Monday night. Why? Monday nights, the restaurants are empty. Over time, the babysitter knows, the restaurants know, the staff knows, the world knows. So it creates leverage. Rhythms create leverage. You look at a company like McDonald's, you don't have to like their food, but it's one of the only companies in the world where a 16-year-old can open it in the morning and collect the money and close at night, and everything in between is operationalized to the tune of to thousands and thousands of stores. Rhythmically following this system creates leverage. So the three values that we push and promote in everything we do is simplicity, probability, and leverage. And that's both on the personal side and the business side.
So it's both. It's intertwined.
Mm-hmm.
It's your overall core values, and I think that's great because, especially, early on in our lives and stuff, we don't really know what that is. I'm sure you didn't know at my age what your core values were. So how did you end up discovering that, and why did you choose these three?
It's a great question. So I didn't know exactly what my core values were, but I knew very clearly what I did not want.
Oh, okay.
And what I mean by that is I had 6 siblings older than me, right? One had passed, but the 5 that were living, I watched them go through life without a compass, without a direction, without strong values. And so even at the age of 16, I came up with this thing, which I talk about almost every day, which is called values-based decision-making. When you're clear on your values, and if you use those values to make decisions, your odds of success are way higher than making random values. And so at a young age, almost sounds funny today, but I watched my siblings, some of whom went to college right away, some waited, but who they lived with, the career choices they made, the people they hung out with, it was so random. And so I came up with rules, even as a kid going to college. I'm never going to room with or do business with a friend, ever. Because I just watched friendships get destroyed from being roommates in college or after. So to this day, I'm 54 years old. I have never once hired a friend or partnered with a friend or lived with a friend. If I remember in college when I was looking for roommates, I wanted the best roommate. I wanted somebody that I could learn from, who was going to motivate me. I didn't want to just have a random friend move in with me and we'll see what happens, because I just saw things, friendships get destroyed. It's the same thing in business. If you're hiring somebody, is it better to hire your brother who's out of work, or is it better to hire the best CFO on planet Earth? Think about it. Now, it might happen that your brother happens to be the best CFO on planet Earth, but it's better for your family if he works somewhere else. What people do is the opposite. They take close friends and family members, they bring them into business, and they destroy their relationships. So for me, that's a massive no-no. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question directly. There's more.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting perspective, because I see a lot of people doing business together, friends, family, whatnot. What made you decide that this is the line I'm going to draw?
So you have to understand that my entire life is a reaction to the chaos of my childhood. Mm-hmm. So everything about me, I probably need more counseling, but everything is about what I didn't want. I didn't want the nonsense and unpredictability of my childhood to play out in my adult life. So I'm looking for patterns. I'm looking for what works. So if I'm hearing at the dinner table the chaos of my oldest brother who started the business, hired his friends, had to fire his friends, got into lawsuits, I'm saying, whoa, 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 I don't want any of that. And I watched my sisters become roommates together in college and almost destroy their relationship. I watched friends and family members pull people into housing situations and just, so I'm probably a quick learner when it comes to that. You don't have to tell me twice. I've watched so many relationships get destroyed. I just check the box. I think one thing that people can learn from this interview is values-based decision-making and not making the same mistake twice. And it's so sad to watch in society. People just, I have a lot of nieces and nephews over 40, and I'm like, don't marry the person you fall in love with, because any two people could fall in love if they're in college or whatever. Marry the person that has the values that you want in a husband or wife 50 years from now. Marry the person that's going to make you a better person. And their parents will go, but Rick, they should get married. They're in love. And I say, love is very important in a marriage. But having been married a long time, love ebbs and flows. But values alignment doesn't. I would much rather marry someone who I'm completely aligned with values-wise, who I'm committed to, than someone who was love at first sight. Because I've been in those relationships. Love at first sight, all you're thinking about is, oh, why aren't we like we were at the beginning? Mm-hmm. So my wife, when we first met, I had already written down the values of the perfect wife for me. And so whenever I dated, if I met somebody who I knew I would be attracted to, but she didn't align with my values, I said next. And so when I met my wife finally, it was a very natural thing. She literally aligned with every single thing I wrote down on my values and qualities of the perfect person for me. So life is a lot like that, I think. If you're looking for fulfillment and you're willing to commit to the long term and endure, then you've got to make decisions from a stable, consistent list of values, both in your business and personal life. And I saw that. I learned that as a kid. So I wouldn't trade my upbringing with anybody. It was great. All the drama and chaos of my brother's passing and my mother having a nervous breakdown and my dad dying allowed me to have a much more mature and enduring view of life.
Yeah, I think what you talked about with like values is really important. You need to be clear on what you want. I did the same thing with what I want in like my a relationship. Define clear values. I wanted to talk about what were the failures you had, and how many times did you fail before you found your success?
Well, it's funny. The word failure is a funny word to me because I fail often and almost every day because I'm always trying things. And even setting up for this interview, there was a potential failure there, right? In terms of we were misaligned. But I want to answer with a story that I think is really telling. Sarah Blakey, who I had the opportunity to talk to recently, was her company's worth $2 billion. She started a firm called Spanx.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Yep. And one of the things that her dad did to her when she was a kid was she had to come to the dinner table every night and tell her dad what she failed at that day. And he would drill her on it. If you're not failing at things every single day, then you're not testing your limits. And so how does a kid learn how to play chess or speak a foreign language or play the piano? They learn by failing over and over and over again. So when she started Spanx, the story goes that she went to 200 different retail businesses with the idea, from Macy's to Nordstrom's to everyone. And everyone slammed the door on her face. And she said, if it wasn't for the fact that I was really good at failing, I would have stopped. Like, who would keep going? And I think society takes that learning away from us. Like, if we're not good enough to endure failure, we probably should go do something else. That's where commitment comes in. Commitment can help you endure through those failures. So anyway, it's kind of a loaded question because I fail every day. I think you want to know some of the big failures.
Mm-hmm.
There's been some really big ones, and one of them that I'll talk about now, I wasn't fully prepared for, is I made the mistake of hiring the wrong person in one of the companies that we invested in. And everybody told me that they were the wrong person. In my gut, I knew they were the wrong person. And by the way, I'm getting on a tangent here, but it's a pretty cool tangent. Gut is 3 letters, G-U-T. And I've heard scientifically your gut can only say yes or no. Your brain rationalizes 1,000 different ways. So my brain was saying, yeah, but he's a good CEO because of this. Because my gut was screaming no. And I've heard the acronym for GUT, G-U-T, is God uttering truth. You better listen to it. And my gut.
I've never heard of that. That's make sure y'all write that down. That's pretty powerful.
Yeah. So God uttering truth. So I didn't fire him. And in fact, I worked with him, and he got the company into a lawsuit that ultimately cost me personally $25 million.
Wow.
And he didn't break any laws or anything like that. He just got us into a lawsuit with a series of customers. And the only way out was literally to just get rid of the customers, which was all the revenue. Now, we probably lost a lot more than $25 million because we could have sold that business for a lot of money. So because I didn't listen to my gut, and because people listening don't listen to their gut, it causes a lot of issues. Some other mistakes, I was way underfunded when I started. I think you have to pick a path when you start a business. And I would tell most people, don't start a business that requires outside capital. When you have to get outside capital, whether it's the SBA or a bank or shareholders, what you're doing is you're creating a business that you hope will be profitable someday. And here I am saying this as a guy who invests outside capital in businesses. But we try to invest the least amount possible to get the business to profitability. So it's much better off to create a business that has the capacity to grow without outside capital. And I've got a close friend who had that philosophy. He says, I've got a lot of business ideas. I'm only going to pick the one that doesn't require outside capital. And he started a business that he grew, and 7 years later sold it for over $100 million. Wow. And he's in the advertising and application space, apps for phones. But the point is, one of his rules was that he only wants to start a business that would not require outside capital. So there's an opposite side of that, which is, if you don't have outside capital, you should still have advisors and a board, because outside perspectives are great. Outside perspectives from investors are different because they only have one perspective. I want to make money. But outside perspectives from people who have a view of, for example, accounting, legal, sales, you get different perspectives, not just, I want a return on capital. You follow what I'm saying?
Yes.
So
how do you find those people?
I think that you have to get the word out, but you have to have the right perspective. So let's back up. Let's go 50,000 feet and back up. If you have a compelling business idea that's aligned with your values and aligned with your purpose, I think you have to see from an advisory perspective, what roles do you need filled? I'm in the middle of that with one of the companies that we invested in, which is, what do we really need right now? And what we really need is somebody that completely understands legal and compliance in that space. So we went out and looked for advisory board members that had that background, and we found 2. So I think you should hire advisors and give them a tiny piece of the business based on the business need. And so a lot of things that I've been talking about throughout this whole interview are just commonsensical things that people don't think about because they're not taking conscious action. They're just reacting. But conscious action would say, find out what your needs are, find advisors and board members that would give you that. And you're getting it for a lot less than if you were to hire it in a staff person. So when you're hiring an executive, the executive, you got to pay them all their salary, their benefits. They want a piece of the business. They want all that. Advisors and mentors generally don't. I'm an advisor to a lot of businesses, and many I don't get paid anything, but I just love doing it.
What's the difference between an advisor and a mentor?
An advisor, in my view, of a business does have some upside. They have either a small piece of the business in terms of options that invest over time. It's a trade, whereas the advisor is giving you time in exchange for money of some kind. A mentor is not that. A mentor is somebody who's gotten to a point in their life where they want to give back, and they do not ask for any compensation. Their compensation is the joy of being a mentor. And I have had mentors in my life cross the line, which is very strange. I have one guy, he was my mentor, and I got him involved in a business, just asking him advice. And when the business started to take off years later, he said, "Hey, you owe me money, you know. If it wasn't for this, that, and the other thing." I said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa. No, you're my mentor. And you told me you could only be my mentor because you had the freedom of saying whatever you needed to say because it wasn't being blocked by compensation." But that was probably a values misalignment now that I'm thinking about it. But I would say that in all relationships, whether advisors or mentors or employees, and I get into this problem at times in my life, is you have to set the expectations right from the beginning. The expectations need to be set right in a marriage, in a relationship, in business, etc. And when the expectations are set up right, then they could be fulfilled on it using simplicity, probability, and leverage. I have run into problems in my life many times when the expectations were not set. And that's a learning lesson for me and everybody.
So who have been your key mentors on your path to fulfillment?
Well, I mentioned Reinhold. His name is Reinhold Wagner. He's about to be 90. And he's a guy that I've known for a really long time, decades, that taught me that business and personal is one. And you can't have success in business unless you have a stable personal life. And that means health. That means long-term marriage. That means parenthood for me. That means having a stable business address. We've had the same office for 25 years. He sent the message of linking business and personal and having stability, which is how he lived his life. And that resonated with me. And that was simple. And that increased the probability of success. It also increased my leverage, because if you're hopping around all over the place and you're signing leases all over the place and you're borrowing money, doing this and that, that's not simplicity, probability, and leverage. So he's one. Another one is Phil Romano, very successful restaurateur and medical device investor, who's 79. And he's been an incredible mentor because he's got a ton of different businesses and he's made a lot of money in a lot of different places, but he leads a very simple life. And what I have learned is when you're clear on your values, you're going to attract mentors that are like-minded. And so Phil, as an example, and I think you heard the interview where I mentioned him a lot, he's so simple in his approach to business. One of the stories that I'd love to share about him was he was buying a medical device company, and we were having lunch a long time ago, maybe 11 years ago. And he said, "I'm trying to hire a CEO to run this company I'm buying." He told me all about the company. He told me all about the perfect CEO. He goes, "You know a lot of people. Who do you know that could fill this role?" And I said, "I don't know." And we literally spent the whole lunch on that one question. Like, he didn't want to leave. He was so hyper-focused because he's a simple guy. I can't buy it unless I've got the right person. And please, and then he followed up for another week, who's the person? And I finally gave him some names. But when we met up a month later at the same restaurant, at the same table where we always met monthly, I said, "Did you find the person to run the company?" And he says, "What person?" I go, "You're buying that medical device company. Remember we talked about it?" He goes, "I don't know what you're talking about. What company?" And I literally thought he was losing his mind. And he finally goes, "Oh, let me tell you the difference between a billionaire," pointing to himself, "and a millionaire," pointing to me. He says, "A billionaire doesn't do anything unless they find the perfect person to run it. Everyone else is running around like a chicken with their head cut off, starting a business, got to get a website, got to do this, got to hire, got to sign a link, and then you become gotta machines." So he had such a simplistic view of business that he forgot about the deal because he couldn't find the right person to run it. That was a massive lesson for me. So that was something else that a billionaire taught me, is to be that simple and hyper focused. And the other thing, if you just embed in all these stories, is there's a trust that the universe is going to provide. And what do I mean by that? That almost sounds weird. If you have a scarcity mindset and you're not clear on your purpose and you're not clear on your values, then every penny matters. And if you don't get your due, you're mad and you're frustrated and you're reaching for every opportunity. You're worried about everything. Very successful people who are aligned in their values and live their priorities, they fully expect that everything's going to work out, even when it doesn't. So meaning if something doesn't work out in the short term, like this deal I just mentioned where he couldn't find the CEO, there's 5 more deals around the corner. They have this inherent trust that everything's going to be fine. It's a really cool way to live. And it took me a long time to have that. And I'm finally at that point in my life where I trust that everything's going to be fine. And I think that also comes from enduring some negative things.
So how do you develop that, unshakable faith?
You have to get clear on why you're here. You have to get clear on your values. You have to write them down. I've told tens of thousands of people, and even wrote a book about it, values-based decision-making, and I'd say 1 out of 1,000 do it. 1 out of 1,000 sit down and say, here's my values, and here's what I'm going to make decisions from. So you have to start with understanding your values and writing them down. What's your purpose, both business and personal, and writing it down. What are your long-term objectives? Writing it down. And once it's set and it aligns with who you are, you'd be shocked. Opportunities will start showing up. And some will align and some won't. And the ones that don't align, you just say next. That's, by the way, is the hardest thing. It even is for me. Morgan's here, and she works in my office with me. But at times, I will chase an opportunity, and I will justify that the values align. I'll say, well, it's really not that far off. But then most of the time, I'll wake up to that reality and move on. But I will assert that every problem that you have ever had in your life, every problem I've ever had in my life, and every problem you've ever had in your life is born out of us doing something with someone that doesn't align with our values. Who you marry, who you partner with, who you get in business with of all kind, who you go out to dinner with. If they're not aligned because you didn't take the time to write down your values, you're going to have chaos. Every single time I violated that, I have paid dearly. There is no shortcuts to this. You want to have tremendous success? Be clear on your values, your purpose, and your objectives, and only make decisions that are aligned, period.
And when you talk about values, when do you know when to compromise, and when do you know when to just stick to it? Does that make sense? Because sometimes it gets confusing, whether that's business, whether that's relationships, whether that's with your friends, your family. How do you know when you need to compromise and adjust, or just stick straight to your values?
I don't like the word compromise. I like the word adjust. If you're clear, look at a guy like Warren Buffett. I love his quote. He says, the difference between successful people and extremely successful people is that extremely successful people say no to almost everything. And they only say yes to things that fully align with their values and their objectives. Yet you look at these young people today and they're saying yes to everything. They actually are taught that saying yes is what you should be doing. And I'm saying, no, the opposite is true. You should be saying yes to finding out your values and your purpose, and then evaluating everything against them. So when would you adjust? I think that it takes time. It's like fine wine. It takes time to be really clear on your values and your purpose. So at your age, you might come up with an initial list, but as you meet people and get involved in deals, you might adjust. But I wouldn't compromise. Like for me, one of my values that later down the list is family. And family means that I don't hire family members in my businesses. I know if I violate that, it's going to be an extreme compromise. Now, you might have a different list of values. You might want family in your business, and you might want the chaos that causes. I don't know. People are, they like to cause harm sometimes. But the reality is, I don't think you should compromise on your stated values. You could adjust your values and then hope that different things show up. And here's why I'm saying it this way. When you're crystal clear on all this stuff, it's almost like the universe provides for you. When Warren Buffett got really clear on the type of companies he wanted to buy and wrote it down decades ago, only then was he able to say yes or no this fast. So let me give you a real world example of that. When John F. Kennedy took over the space program and said we're going to send a man to the moon by the end of the decade of the 60s, because that objective was so clear, they had 8 years to get to the moon and back. That made decisions really clear. If one of their 25,000 engineers came up with an idea, like for a new metal or a new mechanical system to get you there and back, if the head engineer said, how long is it going to take to develop this? The engineer says, well, we're about 15 years away. Well, that's not going to work. No, get that one out of here. When you're clear on your values and you're clear on your objectives and you're clear on your purpose, yes and no becomes easy. And the reason why so many kids, to go back to the beginning of your conversation, are lost and confused and depressed is because there's no clarity. That's the missing ingredient on all this stuff.
Awesome. And talk about your quest to meet and interview billionaires. I heard there was a lot of great stories.
Yeah.
So I want to touch on that.
So really, it was a personal dream of mine based on the crash in '08. When the market crashed in 2008, it was brutal. It was, I keep saying the word brutal, but I didn't know if my business was going to survive. I didn't know if the banking system was going to survive. I didn't know if the world was going to survive. It was bad. And so I came up with the idea of, wouldn't it be great to meet people who have been through a lot of ups and downs in their lives? And so I originally met T. Boone Pickens, who was a Texas oil billionaire. But it was interesting how I met him. I met him because there was a charity event where it said, bid on lunch with a billionaire. That's how I originally met him. And then that led to other charity events, and it's legend now, but it led to me finding inexpensive ways to meet billionaires. And then I got the word out to those people, who else can I meet? And so it kind of just fed itself. And there could have been hundreds. I just didn't have that much time. But that it started out of a very conscious choice to find out what people that had made it in the world, in my eyes, what they endured, and how did they seem so stable and successful. And one of the common denominators of all of them is they had massive failures along the way. So I think societally we teach people to not have failures or to shy away from failures, when that's the exact opposite. I know that I've had thousands of failures. It could be a failure of a request. It could be a bad sales call. It could be a bad business idea. It could be a book that I wrote, which has happened. I've gotten rejected by almost every publisher. But failure is what gives you the skill to keep going, and it's a great muscle to develop. So anyway, it was really a desire to learn at the bottom of the market when everything was at risk.
And I wanted to touch on your experience with Richard Branson, because I heard that was a great story.
So that's a funny story, because I had a friend call me up right after all this happened. And he's like, Richard Branson has never done any interviews on his island. He has a lot of celebrities there and stuff, but he's never done a networking event. And so we came up with the idea of, if we made a donation to his charity, would he host us and brainstorm with us and do interviews with us? And we were young entrepreneurs that just had a vision. So we called the island. It wasn't me, it was another guy. And he said, I will let you stay with me for a week and spend the whole week with me, but you have to make $1 million donation to my charity, thinking he was going to blow us off. So I'm like, wow, that's interesting. So we were able to convince 20 people to go there with a group of 20, take down the whole island, which I think slept like 60. I'm not sure. I can't remember now. And we made the donation to his charity. And he's like, I guess I have to see you. The weird thing about that story is when we got there, I spent a ton of time with him. he had never interacted with regular people before that didn't want something from him. We didn't want anything from him. We, in fact, helped him with his business. And I ended up doing 4 of those, but that's become a regular part of his life now. I think he does about 10 weeks a year of just entrepreneurial groups. And we started the first one. I was part of that first one. And he loves it now. Like, if you want to go, you could find out one of those groups that's meeting, just call the island, it'll tell you. You do have to make a donation, but it helps everybody. Everybody wins because his charity gets funded. He gets to hang out with entrepreneurs. You get the opportunity to say that you spend time with Richard Branson. I don't know how it's going to be now. In the old days, it was full access. He might be it might be old in the tooth for him. I don't know. Another thing, after a couple of years of doing that, he invited me to go to South Africa with him and try to create a Center for Disease Control in Africa because there was an AIDS epidemic and all that. And I got to spend, it was just me and 3 other people. We spent a long time going from state to state and city to city in South Africa trying to create this Center for Disease Control. So had a lot of FaceTime with the guy, learned a lot from him. But at the end of the day, the thing I learned most is he's really a simple guy that does a lot of the things that I'm talking about here. He knows his priorities. He knows his values. He keeps things simple. He does high probability activities, and he likes to leverage through people and systems. So that's all I got for you today, Ronnie. I hope that you learned a ton and that your people learning is. I'm really just offering a perspective. I'm not trying to push my values on anybody else.
Awesome. Let's see what else. What are your opportunities for growth on your horizon?
One of the things that I love to do, it's one of my 5, is learning. So I've got a stack of books I'm reading. I'm also pursuing additional advisory board members to help take my company to the next level. So for me, one of my 5 priorities is learning. So I like to go to conferences. I like to participate in accountability groups. I'm in a weekly accountability group that we've been meeting with since 2010, where we hold each other accountable to objectives. So I like accountability around me. Some people don't, but I do. I like people calling me out on where I'm failing. So those are my opportunities. 3 things: conferences, accountability group, and then my reading list.
And how important, because this is one thing I learned when I was 22 and I joined a mastermind. Mm-hmm. How important is that group of people on your path to, becoming a better person and getting fulfillment?
I think it's incredibly important. I mean, you can't, unless you have a mirror of other people, then how will you know? Everybody has blind spots, and having people that are willing to call you out on stuff is incredibly important. So Benjamin Franklin talked about it over 200 years ago with the junta groups. It's important to have weekly accountability groups, and the most successful people in the world have them. But yet, it's funny, average people say they don't have time. You're like, well, how do you not have time? Well, then you think about they're doing all this other stuff, binge watching TV shows and all the other stuff, crap that fills their day. Of course you don't have time. If you're not honoring your priorities, you don't have time. So.
And what's the biggest thing holding you back right now in order for you to get to the next level?
I would say finding really talented people to help. It seems like when the economy is doing so well, people are gainfully employed, and we're finding people that aren't fully on board with growing a business while growing themselves. And so that's been tough, finding key people. The other thing is, with the way my life's set up, staying in shape. I'm way more effective when I'm in top shape, and right now I'm not. So I feel like that's holding me back. And
I always ask this question to each one of my guests. If you had to start your business from scratch in 2018, what would you do differently?
So let me see what comes to mind. Well, first of all, I would start earlier. I think that I waited too long, even though I was 29. I feel like it was wasted time. I think that if you've got a business idea, the definition of eternity to me is the time between when you know you should do something and the time that elapses until you do it. So that's eternity. So I would start earlier. I would have held out for much better employees day one. I didn't have all of the philosophies I have now fully baked. So I was chasing people who overpromised and underdelivered. So I'd be crystal clear on the people that I hired, what I needed, and what their values were. And then lastly, I've got this thing in business finishing school that's incredibly important. It's called the business frame. And it's basically 6 things that every business needs to be successful. And we hammer this home. You have to have a crystal clear purpose, crystal clear catalyzing statement, number 2. Number 3, crystal clear values. Number 4, a solid business strategy. And business strategy to us is, who's your customer? Who's your absolute ideal customer? How are you delivering your product or service? And exactly what business are you in? And very few businesses can answer those 3. They don't even know what business they're in, never mind who their ideal customer is and how are they delivering their product or service. And an analogy to that is Amazon when they started. What business were they in? Selling books. How are they delivering it? Through the internet. Who was their customer? An early adopter, technology-wise that was on the internet. Those were the 3 things. And people said, well, you're crazy because that's just a small percentage of the market. And Bezos didn't care. He knew that it was going to grow. So strategy. The next thing is crystal clear long-term objectives, where you're going to be in 20 years. And then lastly, quarterly business objectives. You've got to get in the rhythm of setting quarterly objectives and hitting them. So let me repeat. Purpose statement, catalyzing statement. If you don't know what that is, you can look at my TED Talk on that. Clear values, values-based decision-making, business strategy, what, who, and how, and then long-term objectives and short-term objectives. So I would have all that in place, which would have greatly increased simplicity, probability, and leverage.
Awesome. And one last question. What can my audience do to support you and talk more about business finishing school?
I think they wouldn't be supporting me. I think they would be supporting themselves, and they would get indoctrinated with these principles that are very counterculture. We are having an event, our 14th one. It's the bfssummit.com, and that's when Business Finishing School teaches these principles that I've been talking about. It's at the Marriott Quorum on Beltline in Dallas. We've got a lot of people flying in from all over the country. We don't promote locally, so this is interesting. But I'd love to work with your tribe.
Yeah, so we're going to put all the links and everything in the description. bfssummit.com, bfssummit.com. Make sure y'all visit that website and sign up for Business Finishing School. Thank y'all so much for tuning into this episode of the Ronny Phillips Show. If you have any questions or comments or anything, please comment down below. And if you found this video valuable, please share it with your friends, your family. And thanks so much for tuning in, and have a great day.
Thanks, man.